One day a young teenager had been hit by a bus, causing that young man to go into a coma because of the accident. While he was hospitalized, that person will have his adventures in a world full of magic. Let's begin. After 17 years, that young man had awakened from his coma, but now he was 40 years old. No one from his family had been to visit him except for his nephew. The nephew's name is Takafumi. Since his uncle had woken up, he started talking like a madman, thinking he came from a magical world. He explains that while he was in coma, the family had a lot of financial problems to keep him alive. The uncle apologizes to him for all the problems he has caused. He explains that while he was in coma, he was in another world having adventures. The nephew doesn't believe anything, but the uncle starts to cast some spells. Nothing happened. When suddenly a gust of wind comes from the uncle's hands, Takafumi couldn't believe it. Then all his uncle's delusions were true. After a week, Uncle had completely improved. Uncle and nephew came out of it ready to use Uncle's magical powers to earn money. They made YouTube videos with the uncle's powers. Now the two were partners. Uncle had magic and power but didn't know how to use any of the new technology, while Takafumi was more than suited to this new technology. It was win-win for both of them. While he is living his daily life, he tells how his life was the first day he arrived in the other world. He was greeted by other adventurers, but they beat him up just because he was so ugly, but that didn't matter as it was the past. Now with this new technology he would be happy, but no, as he was reading comments on his YouTube videos he realized that many people had insulted him out of nowhere. The technology may have changed, but the people were still the same. Later Takafumi asked his uncle if he hadn't tried to create science or technology in the other world. The uncle says yes, projecting his thoughts. But the people in that world thought it was dark magic, so they tried to assassinate him. The only person who saved him was a very pretty elven woman. He had left without saying goodbye. Takafumi explains that he must have a cell phone to be able to communicate, but the uncle says that he cannot get used to this new technology, so he prefers to buy a very old model. The nephew realizes the mistake. Although the model was cheap, the uncle had not considered the shipping cost. The final cost was too high and they could not afford it. The uncle in his anger jumps out the window, but it was just to be able to fly. The uncle wanted to save the shipping cost, so he had gone to pick up the goods himself, obviously using a flying skill. Then Takafumi realized that they could save money on the shipping cost. While living the quiet lives, the uncle tells that once he did not know how to reciprocate a woman in the other world, an orc was about to finish that woman, so he decided to save her. The woman wanted to thank him by giving herself as his wife, but to the uncle it seemed something strange, because later that woman had pushed him to the bottom of a cliff. She thought she was going to die, but she was saved by the elf woman. That girl tells him that she saved his life. The guy wanted to be grateful and put a ring on her finger, but the elf misunderstood that act and said yes. The next day, the guy took the ring from her, sold it and gave her the money for saving him. Obviously, the elf didn't want money, but she was ashamed to say her true feelings with the ugly-faced adventurer. The next day, they were living their quiet life chatting and talking about video games of the past. That event made the uncle remember that he had adventures as if it was an RPG. While on his adventures in the other world, he had come to a town, being mistaken as an ogre. But this time, the uncle beat him up for the offense. That gentleman was the mayor of the town. Knowing that he was very powerful, he asks him for a favor, which was to fulfill a mission. A dragon was stalking the village. He takes him to see a woman. That girl was the only one who could defeat the dragon, who was a specialist in ice. But the girl says she is depressed and didn't want to kill the dragon. She asks him to look for a white flower from the mountains, her only memory of her mother. The uncle says he understands and leaves. Later the uncle had defeated the dragon himself, ignoring the ice woman's request. Takafumi says enough is enough. The uncle had skipped many steps. They decide to give themselves a little break by playing a little. The life of these two people had passed very quickly. The quiet life made Christmas came. Takafumi was curious about her uncle's past, but uncle rarely talked about his past as he felt it was boring and hard to get over. He asks if she really wants him to tell her about his past, as he felt it was very boring. He tells that in the other world, they also have parties. As he had defeated the dragon, they had a party, but the uncle just ate a lot and went to sleep, concluding the story. The nephew is disappointed because he thought he was going to tell him something incredible, but the uncle warned that his adventures were boring. He recalled that later that night the ice girl came to visit him to ask how she could change and stop being a coward, but the uncle, as he was a fool, tells him that he should not change anything and is fine as he is, corrupting the ice girl. Takafumi is disappointed to hear these adventures, so they changed the topic of conversation. Today was New Year's Day. A woman is walking quietly through the streets when she sees a very ugly man and decides to walk away. A person recognizes the woman and it was Takafumi. She realizes that it was one of her best friends whom she had not seen for a long time. Takafumi invites her friend to her house so they can have some tea. As they already had confidence, she gladly accepts. She arrived at Takafumi's apartment. As the door was open, she entered without problems. While she was waiting quietly, the uncle arrived from the walk. He thought that this woman was a thief and wanted to erase her memory with her powers, but Takafumi arrived to save her. The nephew says that she is his friend and that she had come to visit. The uncle apologizes. The friend can't believe that this weirdo in the park is her friend's uncle. Takafumi introduces her uncle and says he has powers. She obviously doesn't believe anything and says she must show her powers now. The uncle acts all important and says he can't show his powers because he's an influencer with 2 million views. Takafumi says okay, then the uncle puts his hand on the girl's head and reads her thoughts. She was apparently in love with her nephew and had also taken a bath to come visit, but obviously she denies all that because it would be too obvious. Then she asks who he is. The uncle answers that he came back from a magical world. Later, the uncle is worried about something. Because he had received a message from YouTube, Takafumi checked the message and realized that YouTube was demanding that he must have more than 1,000 subscribers to continue monetizing. They barely reached 800 subscribers. Takafumi realized what the problem was, as his uncle always ended up fighting in the comments with people, causing them to remove their subscription. This was fatal. They would no longer have methods of monetary income. The uncle became sad. This event reminded him of something similar in the past. On the adventure's journey, he had come to a city completely sealed by magic. As usual, the elf girl had ended up following him. She can't help but follow him. He keeps ignoring her because he thought she was a stalker. As they walked through the streets, people thought he was an orc because of his ugly face, but the elf girl always appeased people. She explains that the city barrier is very powerful and no one could break it. Suddenly, the uncle uses his skills and without much trouble destroys the barrier. When the barrier was destroyed, many titans that were near the city were ready to enter and destroy it. The guy had gotten into big trouble, but it was no time for regrets. These heroes have no choice but to defend the city. The elf girl can't blame a fool for her ignorance, so she decides to use all her skills to be able to defend the city and forgive the mistakes of the person she loves. When suddenly she collided with the barrier, because the guy with the magic skills had restored it, the people were safe. But who destroyed the barrier? Everyone was looking at the guy. They were looking for a culprit. Just came the elf to save him and prevent people from judging him as evil, explaining that the barrier was already old. She says she owes him a favor. All she asked for was a dinner between the two of them. The next day, the uncle had gone far away. He felt he was being extorted. That had been the bad experience the guy had had. The guy said that to make amends for his mistakes in arguing with people, he simply apologized and asked them to subscribe to his channel. Takafumi thought it wouldn't work, but to her surprise, many people accepted his apology and started subscribing. Takafumi's friend had always come to visit. It had become a habit. Today Takafumi had gone shopping and they were left alone. The uncle was curious to know if she is in love with his nephew, but she says she doesn't want to talk about such topics with an old man. The uncle seems to get sad and leaves. The girl wants to apologize to him, but when she sees him again, the uncle had transformed into a beautiful elven woman so they can talk about love topics. Just at that moment Takafumi arrived. He stares at them, not saying a single word. The only thing that came to his mind at that moment was that they had to record some videos for YouTube, but before that they would have to attend to their guest. The uncle was anxious to record and decides to project his nephew's thoughts. Within his nephew's memories he could see how his best friend from the past bullied Takafumi, being completely different thoughts from the ones she had. Takafumi says that despite everything, he always considered her as a friend to confide in, bumping fists. It was time to record the YouTube video. The uncle transformed into a woman uploaded the video to the internet. In less than a day, the YouTube video had become very popular. Reading the comments, the uncle realized that all the success of that video was thanks to the pretty appearance. Disappointed of the reality he was living in.